I do want to welcome, I'm really excited to have both Elena Madison and Sean Warner. Like I said, we're across the country in this phone call today, which is really exciting. They'll be joining us in conversation on placemaking. And in order to, and we'll talk about what that means, and we'll get a chance to have a definition of it. And Dylan will be moderating our conversation. I'll join Elena and Sean for a few of those questions, representing the Conservancy. But we thought it would be fun, and we don't typically do this with the chats, but we thought it would be fun to start with an icebreaker, which is somewhat fun. We do these on our virtual tours as well. So today's icebreaker is just think for a moment for yourself and think about a public space that really resonates for you. It could be something in San Diego, it could be from your hometown, or a place you've experienced in your travels. But just think, why is that place special to you? What makes it unique? Just give, don't overthink it, but give it some consideration. And Dylan will take it from here and call on a few of you to share what that place is to you and what it may mean. Feel free to raise your hand literally, or use your chat function so we can call on you. But we'll just grab a few stories before we start. We think that will really set the tone for this conversation.
You're not going to share yours first?
Well, I'm happy to share mine first. So for me, I will say this. I lived for 10 years in Madison, Wisconsin, and the Capitol Square, if you've ever been there, it's on an isthmus. There's two lakes, and the Capitol Square is really vibrant and active with academics and politicos. And in the summer, they have a concert series, concerts on the square. And they also have a farmer's market every week. And so for me, that place really resonates. It brought everyone together, and it just made me feel so deeply connected to the city itself and the activity. It was a really vibrant, active community. And so for me, that's my special place.
Cool, thanks. I'm gonna pick on the Rossmans first. Glenn and Lynn. Tell me.
Am I on?
Yes, let's have the better half go first.
Okay. So what resonates for me is to be out in Maui and to be golfing and outside enjoying the beautiful weather and being present with feeling the beauty of the landscape and the butterflies and other things that you see while you're playing golf. So that's what resonates for me.
Awesome. Glenn?
And the other half.
Yeah.
Probably won't surprise some people, but it's Balboa Park. And the reason is that when I first moved to San Diego, within the first couple of years, being involved in the visitor center and Balboa Park really made San Diego feel like home. So it gave me a presence in San Diego, and it was a new adventure. I'd never lived anywhere else other than Fort Wayne, Indiana, until I came out here. And then when I got reconnected to my high school sweetheart, just happens to be somewhere on this call, one of the first things I showed her as touring San Diego when she came to visit for a friend's son's wedding, I took her to Balboa Park a couple of times, and she said, well, I've been to the zoo, but I didn't realize all of Balboa Park was here. So there was a connection there with the start of our life together. It's actually now about 11 years ago.
Awesome, thanks. Let's hear from Bobby.
I had to unmute.
That's a good student.
I'm from the East Coast originally, but I often remember, and not that I go to Mr. A's very often, but I remember arriving here in San Diego about a week after I finished my student teaching teaching in Illinois and flying into totally different architecture, thinking, what have I done? And I'm here 53 years later, so I like it here.
Thank you. All right, Kathy, hi.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. You know, Sarah, I've got to say, I'm not going to change my answer, but when I listened to you, I got a degree at the University of Wisconsin in Madison many, many years ago, and that you almost kicked my mind out of my head, because I'm remembering now how the winter snow and the ski launch and the lake and, all that. I mean, what a great place that was. And climbing up Bascom Hill and going 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because it was so icy. Wonderful place. But I've got to say, my favorite is the Central Oregon coast. Where the ocean and the rivers and the forests all kind of come together. It's definitely breathtaking and calming and soothing and all of that. It's beautiful.
That sounds awesome. All right, well, I'll do one more and then we'll go ahead and get started on our program. Gonzalo, hello. Nice to see you. Coming off of mute. I see ya. It's in the works. Oh, still on mute. Uh-oh. Stuck on mute. Give me a
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, we're good.
Okay, yeah. It's the first time I use the iPad, and it doesn't have the same configuration.
Yeah.
Well, some of you have heard me tell the story before. Our annual vacation when I was in school in Imperial Valley was to come to Balboa Park and to the zoo. And not being able to afford a fancy hotel, we would drive up in the evening after my dad got home from work, and we would drive right up to the parking lot and just sleep in the car and be the first ones in the park and in the zoo the next day. And having now many years later with my wife, spent a couple of months in Europe and making it a point to go to all the major parks and all the cities that we went to. It's just amazing the history and the culture that you can capture and you can maintain in a municipal park. So as jealous and as impressed as I was by all those parks, still the one that is in my backyard is Balboa Park. And that's the one that I can go anytime I want. That is the one that I can do something about in terms of maintaining it, protecting it. So for me, it's gotta be Balboa Park.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for everybody that I picked on to sharing their answers. But I think that this segment today on placemaking is going to be right up your alley. We're going to talk about connecting places and people. So I do want to start off with a few prepared questions that we have for our panelists. So Elena, I would love to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the project for public spaces and how the concept of placemaking came about?
Sure. That's why I'm here. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces. I'm very excited to continue these conversations and to see that all of you are exploring placemaking in your own way. I work for the Project for Public Spaces. We're a national public space planning and design organization. We're a nonprofit organization and have been around since 1975 at this point. So obviously I have not been there that long, but I've been there almost 20 years. So I actually kind of remember the beginnings of using the term placemaking in our work, even if the nature of the work has always been very focused on people and connecting people to place. And in addition, it was always about connecting people to place in a way that is active and engaged and really helps people claim a space as their own. So as I was listening to all of you, of course you're gonna love Balboa Park. It's a fantastic and unique place. We talked about Madison. We even had like a side chat about it. But these are all places that it's not just places that you visit. They're really, people feel a connection to these places and they feel that they belong and they want to be there. And I think that's the most important lesson of placemaking, is that it's really about the process of bringing people together to make that place together, working together. And seeing so many faces here, obviously you're on the right track with working together and having partners and having these conversations. So none of this is new. It was interesting when Gonzalo, when you were talking about visiting European places, and these days we hear more and more about the things that European cities do all the time and we thought were impossible here in the United States, and suddenly everybody's dining outside. There's so many comments out there, and one of the best I saw recently on Twitter, I admit I do use Twitter, was like, congratulations, you just discovered Europe. Yes, we dine outside, we engage with the community, we do all kinds of things outside, and people in Europe seem to have more of a tradition. But I think placemaking is helping us bring those experiences in our own communities in ways that make sense for us. It's not about really bringing Europe to the United States. It's about making these places attractive and welcoming and really reflecting the people in the community so they feel that they belong, they feel that these places are for them and have something to offer them and are not inaccessible or unwelcoming. And I think that today with COVID, but also with everything that has happened with Black Lives Matter and other considerations, that's the most exciting thing about placemaking, is that we're having these conversations about how do we bring everybody in those spaces so everybody feels welcome. How do we create places where people see themselves as places where they can not only visit but contribute to, as places that are offering them something that is really appealing and attractive. And I think I'm gonna stop here because I talked a lot and I have a lot to say, but I would love to hear more about this conversation. And of course, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I do want to, I have a couple questions for Sean. So Sean, you, previous to being a part of Downtown San Diego Partnership, I know you spent 5 years as a placemaking manager in Long Beach. Is there anything that you can tell us about that?
Yeah, first, thanks. It's great to be here tonight. I love talking about placemaking and hearing different perspectives and ideas. So it's really great we're having this conversation. Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough. I mean, I love the job I do, working with the community to kind of make their neighborhoods more livable. I was in Long Beach for the Downtown Long Beach Alliance and working as placemaking manager there. So really great to work in it was great to work in a waterfront downtown. We have similar issues in San Diego that I experienced in Long Beach. You know, how do you connect the waterfront to the downtown core? We have that issue here in San Diego. Permitting issues, working with the city is always a challenge to get some of this stuff done. Sometimes you ask for forgiveness rather than permission. So we do that sometimes as well. But yeah, we as placemaking manager there and as the director of community enhancement for the partnership here, really it's two kind of roles. It's working with the business community and using placemaking as an economic driver. I always think of downtown and the public realm as the front porch to a city. It's really how people get their first impression if they're going to a restaurant, concert, a museum, what have you. What the streetscape and the public spaces look like are important for the economic vibrancy of the downtown. And then also a lot of the projects we work on, most of them, it's working with the residents, the people that live there, the business owners, the people that work there on a constant basis. So making sure the projects, you know, work for them. Are they true to that neighborhood, to that area? Nothing is cookie cutter. We borrow ideas, but each idea is specific to a neighborhood. And so that's really important. And that's what I get a lot of fun out of today. This morning, I was in the Marina neighborhood walking with a couple residents, brainstorming ideas and exploring. And I discovered some new places, and we came up with some great ideas. So it's really a fun part of the job, is to work with the community. So yeah, I've been in San Diego for about 1.5 years. Like I said, I was in Long Beach, and working with the Downtown Partnership, we work with each of our 6 neighborhoods that are in our property-based improvement district. So we have placemaking funding for projects, and we're working on creative crosswalks. We're working on parklets prior to the COVID pandemic, and it's as Elena said, it's great to see a lot of these projects fast forward all of a sudden, and now there's, you know, parklets everywhere and people dining outside everywhere. So it's really making the public realm more interesting, more vibrant, and it's a fun job, like I said.
Yeah. Do you have any, what would you say are some of your favorite examples in San Diego of great placemaking?
Yeah, well, other than the outdoor dining that's taking place right now with Curbside San Diego throughout downtown, prior to moving to San Diego, one of my favorite destinations was Courtyard. In addition to Balboa Park, that was always on the list. But in downtown, it was something that we tried to mimic in downtown Long Beach. So it was great to see that use of a parking lot for, you know, public space, gathering, retail, restaurant uses. And then now I think Waterfront Park is really a great public space. I have a young child, 3-year-old boy, and that's our go-to now, where he loves it. And it's a great, that water feature, just the way it's designed and the open space really lends itself to people coming together, gathering now at a safe social distance. But even now it feels very safe, and it's great to be there. So I love those 2 examples in downtown.
Awesome, thanks. Sarah, I know last year Project for Public Spaces helped facilitate a visioning workshop and a community engagement meeting on this topic. What were some of the outcomes from that?
Yeah, I can take myself off. That was a really exciting time because we had the visioning workshop with some key stakeholders that were part of Balboa Park, but also part of the larger community and region. So Sean was a part of that conversation at that time, as well as other placemakers and urban planners. And then we followed that up with a large-scale community engagement conversation, which PPS helped facilitate. And it resonated because the themes that came up in the visioning workshop were echoed in the community engagement portion. And so I think that when we focused on 4 key areas to look for plans to develop placemaking concepts for, that came with community engagement. I think the next step for that will be exciting to look at deeper engagement with communities that use those spaces and are adjacent to them. The 4 key areas that were brought up as opportunities, key opportunities, I mean, there were many, included Sefton Plaza. If you're familiar with that, on the west side, what we call the West Mesa, at the intersection of 6th Avenue and Laurel, right before you're crossing the bridge, where the lawn bowling and the dog park, that's really kind of a backyard or a front yard for many residents in Bankers Hill and really right along 6th Avenue. There's some really beautiful creative concepts to activate that space. The landfill, so if you know the East Mesa, the landfill, there's some really cool opportunities that folks developed based on inspiration from other locations around the world. Golden Hill was another area of interest, especially because the neighborhood, that's one of the, I don't have the specifics. I think Jackie, I'm going to call on her at some point to help me with this, but that's a really active and engaged neighborhood and one of the oldest, I'm not sure if it's developed park of Balboa Park, but there's a lot of history there and a lot of neighborhood involvement. And then last but not least, and this is where I might call on Jackie, is the Palisades. So the project right now that the city's been working on to reclaim pedestrian space in an area that was formerly dedicated to parking, that was one of the areas identified in our workshops, and is now coming to fruition in a way through the support of Parks and Rec and their initiative. If I might, Jackie, are you willing to jump into this conversation because you've got some updates for us with Parks and Rec?
Sure.
Can you?
So as far as the renovations are concerned with the Palisades, they're moving along. They're on track for a soft opening in the beginning of September. It really is awesome to see this transformation. You know, sometimes we get delayed here with various things, but we've had this great opportunity because we have had some, you know, closures in the park to really get a lot of construction work done. So there were the changes that you'll see from start at the kind of the middle of where the parking lot used to be, and there's a newly enhanced tram stop that was put in, and planters that will surround the tram stop to, you know, to give some shade for people waiting for the tram. The city and the support groups help with deciding on the designs for the trees and the locations for the planters. And there's going to be some gorgeous aristocrat pears that surround the tram stop with some really elegant lighting as well. There's different colored ground planes for where the tram will pull in and where the pedestrians will be. So it's really nice to see the use of the change of color and texture and material in the ground plane to highlight, you know, pedestrian areas. And then in the south of the tram stop is where the major pedestrian plaza is coming back. And that area will be surrounded by big, large planters that will have evergreen elm trees in them. And then the interior space is an open space that will have tables and chairs similar to what we have in the Plaza de Panama. And then eventually the plan is to bring back the fountain that was in the central area right there. It was called the Singing Fountain. And Nancy Carroll Carter could probably tell us a lot more about that than I can. But so that's the plan, and the fountain is not part of this phase 1 reconstruction, but the opening up of this area to pedestrians and pedestrian use is the major goal that has been accomplished with this phase 1 part of it. And the soft opening is beginning of September.
Thanks, Jackie. That was a great update. It shows that, you know, I think that there's incremental change possible, and there's some really great visioning that was done that doesn't have to require, you know, gigantic investments, but it can be smaller and in partnership and collaboration, like the Palisades, which is a great first project for us.
The singing fountain sounds glorious. All right, but I have a group question for everyone. I know with the restrictions on public space and gathering during COVID, what are some of the ways that we can reimagine what placemaking really means to us? You know, Balboa Park is such a unique place. What do each of you see as its primary challenges and opportunities during this time? Maybe Elena, do you have any?
Well, I have a lot of observations from other parks around the country and from what I saw in Balboa Park a year ago. So I haven't obviously been there since our last visit, which was about this time. I think it was in September of last year. So it's been almost a year. But we have been in conversations with people who manage professionally urban parks and other public spaces from across the country. Pretty much since the beginning of COVID, we've been gathering in these kind of informal roundtables just to talk through the huge challenges that we see with COVID. And one of the things that we've seen everywhere is that yes, capital improvements are great, and those are the things that people can really hold on to and move forward with. But bringing people back into your park and into your space and how to do it safely and in a considerate way is a challenge for everybody. So I've seen a lot of really interesting kind of approaches to this. People have been talking about accordion plans, basically planning for like small and safe, and if it's safer, bring more people in, bring more programming. And I think you guys kind of saw this with initially the museums reopening and then having to shut down again. So I think this is a great time to experiment. We're getting a little bit of a sort of a green light for all kinds of lighter, rapid build, just like all these dining parklets that are happening everywhere. Prior to COVID, it would have taken like 10 months, potentially even longer for each and every one of them to get permission to be built. So I think the same applies to the park, and it's a great opportunity to try some smaller things and see how people react to them, obviously by making people feel safe and cared for and letting them know that it's you know, their health is not going to be at risk by being in the park. But that's one of the opportunities I see. And the other big opportunity, not just for Balboa Park, but for all of our public spaces, is to really embrace the variety of activities and the social life that we can have safely indoors, but we know we can have outdoors. We were seeing articles in the last few months about Denmark and how they didn't close their schools, but instead took school classes and school groups to study in the park. We're seeing a huge demand for library services that are probably going to be safer outdoors. So I think this is an incredible opportunity for the amazing cultural institutions in the park to kind of be an anchor outside of their walls and be more present, which I think was always a goal and a desire. And I guess there is like if there is a silver lining to this situation, I think that is it, that everybody is kind of working through the challenges. Nobody has all the answers, and we're learning from each other, and the learning and the changes are happening very quickly. So great period of experimentation.
Thanks, Elena. I see that Joyce has her hand raised. Joyce, do you want to come off of mute if you're on mute?
I did. I actually raised my hand just before you hit on a follow-up then and reinforce what you just said. And I think we have just a tremendous opportunity in Balboa Park with all the cultural institutions who have great, wonderful buildings and great art in those buildings. And now people are not able to get in those buildings. And so the great opportunity we have is to work with those cultural institutions and bring all that art into the park. And it would be something that probably we wouldn't have those conversations if we weren't in this situation. And yet it'll make the park a much more rich environment for everybody who goes into it. So I would hope that as these cultural institutions are looking at how they bring the arts outside of those buildings, and I think we can have some just wonderful, wonderful opportunities. Just another question was on my mind is, as we're dealing with parks being as welcoming to all diversity, and we're in this Black Lives Matters movement, and there's so much racial tension, and are our parks really as welcoming as they should be? And Are there examples of parks that are doing good things that really make diverse populations feel welcome and included?
Maybe you want to start to address this. You have a committee on placemaking now started for the Downtown San Diego Partnership. And maybe you can speak to how this plays into your committee.
Yeah, I mean, just generally in response, it's really engaging that community and identifying what their needs are for the space. So we established a placemaking committee earlier this year at the Downtown Partnership. So it's made up of various stakeholders in our neighborhood, various backgrounds and skill sets, and really looking at a blueprint for what our efforts in placemaking will look like over the next 1 to 3 years. And so we have broken that committee into subgroups looking at programming, looking at we call it place infrastructure, but the physical improvements in our downtown. And then also place branding. How do we tie it all together? What makes each neighborhood unique? And so really through that committee, part of it is an engagement with our different neighborhoods. Each, as I mentioned earlier, each has its unique needs, its own identity. And so whatever we do, improvements we make in each neighborhood really is going to be driven by the people that live and work in those neighborhoods. And so that's a part of a key component of placemaking is having the people that are going to use the space really drive what it is, what it looks like.
I'll let Elena wrap this up, but I did want to indicate that it was almost a year ago where there was a placemaking conference hosted by PPS in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where this was the entire theme of the conference and all the workouts and breakout sessions. And, certainly the consistent work being done by all of our cohorts around the country is exactly what is being described as that immediate engagement. So we hosted a session last summer, but it's certainly not, you need to pay attention to where you host a workshop, what time of day you host the workshop, how many workshops you provide, is it within the neighborhood, and are you actually getting the residents to the table to have a conversation about how they use the space and what they envision for the space. And I know that was part of the evolution of Plaza de Panama, and there was a lot of intention around that, and that's why I think it's been successful. But that's the consistent theme of successful inclusion. Elena, maybe you can speak a little further to that. And then I noticed Kathy has a question as well.
Okay, I'll speak and then I'll hand it over to Kathy. I mean, everything that's been said so far seems to be the right direction. I think one of the things that we were all underestimating is how for certain communities and for certain neighborhoods, we need to go the extra step. And that may mean that if people can't come to the workshop has to come to them. And it may mean that in order for the community to really trust and invest their time and efforts into the park and the ideas for the park, they really need to be part of the decision making. So members of the community have to join your committee, have to be leading those workshops. So I think the lessons, and I'm happy that we've started that conversation a while back. So this is not new to many of us, but there's just so much work to be done. So the efforts really need to be around centering the people from those communities that are going to be really embracing the spaces and making them their own. And our collective role is to be facilitators and contributors, but we can't be leading this anymore. It has to be coming from the communities that have been left out in the past.
Thanks, Elena.
Kathy, I'll pass it to you now.
Okay, I just wanted to follow up with what Joyce was suggesting. It would be fairly simple. The San Diego Museum of Art has quite a sculpture garden, as you know, and we have sculpture out in front of the museum, and a whole docent group that could lead tours if we organize them. And some of our sculpture is in fact done by diverse artists. For instance, there's the large one that's sort of in front of the restaurant that has, it's done with the idea of immigration across the Mexican border, and it's very interesting to talk about. It would draw certainly some diverse people to talk about that. I just think we could really fairly easily get some tours going. I am a docent, so I know that, and it would be really fun to do. The idea would be then hooking up groups who would be scheduled and how we would do that. But I think that would be an easy task.
That's fantastic.
That's a cool idea. I do want to open it up officially to our Q&A portion. I know we had a couple questions that were sent in ahead of time, but one that we were talking about the effects of COVID, but we had a question on how expensive it would be to temporarily install fully stocked hand washing stations around some of the more visited areas of the park. What do you think?
I thought Elena and Sean had great answers to this in our check-in. This is a meaningful question in the context of placemaking. So either one of you, welcome you to chime in.
Yeah, I'll just yeah, I mean, it's important for people to feel safe. So, I mean, that's a great question, whether it's social distancing, hand washing stations. One of the things we're doing as part of our Curbside San Diego program, where we're working with restaurants and providing expanded dining areas in the street, we purchased some sanitizer stations, not full hand washing stations, but sanitizer stations that are placed in and around the dining areas. And those are about $150 each, and we bought those on Amazon. I think the prices vary, but roughly that's what they cost, and it's almost a must now for whenever we're doing these types of activations.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add other than hand sanitizer is a lot cheaper than a hand washing station. And one of the first places where we saw this in New York City at the height of the pandemic was actually in our farmers markets, because we kept the markets open as an essential service. People needed to get food, and that's how they solved the question. There was no time to create temporary hand washing stations. Big bottles of hand sanitizer on every stand seems to be a good, easy solution.
Do we have any other questions?
You will see some of those sanitizer units around the park now. Parks and Rec has actually deployed that. I believe they had a lot of them in stock because they use them during December nights and big events like that. So we're not used to seeing them on a day-to-day basis because we used to use them just at the big events, but now you'll see them on a day-to-day in various locations around the park.
Thanks, Jackie.
We also had a question with current limitations on funding, what do you see as a practical and achievable proof of concept that can demonstrate the social and economic value of placemaking in Balboa Park in the post-COVID era? Sarah?
I'll answer. I'll give I think the example we started with the Palisades is a good example, proof of concept. It's the key right now is that it's not necessarily always about creating an event in the space. So I know that right now we're missing our Food Truck Friday events, and that's really been a great way for us to express a version of placemaking. But we also need to understand and recognize that creating a space that's welcoming, as Elena said, and feels comfortable, that can be self-activated and organically used, I think that in itself is sustainable, and that shows that your proof of concept is viable. And you can then choose based on COVID or non-COVID or resources, you know, if you have staffing and funding to program that space, collaboration with partners, there's huge opportunity, but you have to start with the space itself and make sure that it can be used and people want it. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Any other questions? I know we're running short on our time now, but I do want to open the floor if anybody has anything, or come off of mute. Free.
Dylan?
Hi, Paul.
During the call, I've been thinking back fondly to some of the visits that Fred Kent made to San Diego, and some of the things Fred from the Project for Public Spaces has written, and his ideas about having the activities that we're generating with these experiments is very appealing, of course. One of the most fascinating of his, about the way he thought about placemaking to me, as I best recall, is that he was very interested in the pathways between these different places to make sure that that there wasn't just an isolated area for seniors and a different isolated area for preschoolers and a different isolated area for millennials and the like. He wanted to be sure that they bumped into one another and formed a community. Of course, this is related to hugely larger societal questions, like whether the disappearance of the military draft assures that we never meet anyone outside of our original social circles. I mean, there are huge issues related to interconnecting. And I'm wondering what we could do as an organization to contribute to interconnections between the groups for whom we're providing these isolated experiments. For example, should we be a matchmaker between the Horseshoe Club and the Mingay Museum for some exhibit on horseshoes in folk art? Should we, for groups we deal with across the table, are we doing things so that our board members intermingle with, let's say, many more employees from the Department of Park and Rec than simply the employees whom we negotiate with? How are we connecting these places that we're doing so well at experimenting with right now?
Jackie, do you want to? I think I was privately messaging Jackie on this one. I think this is a great question for Jackie.
Paul, I miss you, first of all. So thank you for your question. It's great comments. And one of the things that we actually did the week before COVID hit was we had a stakeholder group meeting about the Palisades. We've been talking a lot about Palisades just because there is a big project happening there. And one of the things we found out about when we brought this group together is all the different adjacent uses. And, you know, like you said, you know, how is, you know, the future Comic-Con audience going to connect with the automotive museum audience? And, you know, is there a possibility to have like a classic car show with Comic-Con themed characters intermingling together? You know, these are ideas that came out of discussions with those groups. And of course, we have the municipal gym there and Air and Space and the international cottages. So there's all different groups in that area that could really create a really interesting and kind of fun event in sometimes, but also just on a day-to-day basis. You know, if each of those entities are represented somehow in that space, what is their contribution and what can they bring to the table? And that was one of the questions that we asked, you know, how can you contribute to this space to make this unique space different than the Plaza de Panama or any other area of Balboa Park? So that was a conversation and an in-person meeting that we actually had in the beginning of March. And now we're following up with a Zoom meeting, hopefully in a week or two, with that same group and touching base to see, you know, where we stand with that as the space starts to actually become available. But that is a great idea. Thank you for reinvigorating us on that connection part of it.
I will say in the recommendations from Project for Public Spaces that, you know, in all of those recommendations, it's keeping in mind connectivity. You know, Sefton Plaza, how do you create that connection between Sefton and the Central Mesa, where the arts and culture is? And how do you create that welcoming indicator that shows you what's on the other side of the bridge? And, you know, looking at the plans that PPS developed for Palisades and looking at, they had one that was not quite in the space where it is now, but keeping in mind that there's a gap now between the cars, you know, there's like the space that's been set aside, the cars, and then where people are normally walking, and coming up with creative solutions to bridge that gap, whether it's through collaborative relationships with the partnering institutions. Even the Cactus Garden is a good example of a way to create a connection from space, place to space in that geographic area. But it has to be always part of the conversation, Paul. I think you're right in that.
Do we have a committee that's focusing on that kind of matchmaking, not just creating the places, but doing that kind of matchmaking? And maybe we should have an annual prize for the match of the most disparate two groups, you know, an annual challenge, you know.
I'm putting that on the list, and actually that cues us up to Connie, who I wanted to let have closure on this call and this meeting, and I'll turn it over to Connie. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This is clearly one of those conversations that could go on for at least another drink or two, and it's really always enriching and inspiring, Elena, to hear from you and Sean. So thank you for making the time and contributing your ideas to this discussion. I really want to thank all of you who've shown up and not only shown up, but really invested in this conversation. I know you're going to be taking away some of the ideas and seeing how you can apply them within Balboa Park. So I appreciate that very much. And Sarah and Dylan, fantastic job as always. Jackie too. I hope all of you on the call can see the energy and the excitement that the Conservancy team has for these opportunities. And we look forward to having more of these chats over the coming months.